Again, thank you for joining us for this third installment of PRS Grand Rounds. My name is Shuja Shavkat. I am one of the resident ambassadors to PRS. I come from Lehigh Valley Health Network, where I'm PGY6, and I'm joined virtually today by my co-resident ambassadors, Jordan Fry from NYU and Chad Purnell from Northwestern. After great feedback and participation from our last two Grand Rounds events with Dr. Rod Rorick about rhinoplasty and Dr. Alexis Hazen on transgender surgery, we decided to bring you yet another event. Today we'll be joined by Dr. Robert X. Murphy to give you the third virtual live PRS Grand Rounds lecture in our series entitled Pathways to Leadership in Plastic Surgery. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Dr. Murphy is a professor of surgery as well as chief integration officer at Lehigh Valley Health Network in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He's also the program director of the plastic surgery residency and the past president of the American Society of Plastic Surgeons. Dr. Murphy hails from New York, where he received his MD from NYU. He then made his way to Boston and completed his general surgery training at Beth Israel Hospital. He then returned back to New York to complete his plastic surgery training at the Montefiore Medical Center and hand fellowship at NYU. His expertise in leadership is exemplified in his experience both within our own institution as well as nationally and internationally. He headed the ASPS in 2014, and now he's part of the board of directors representing North America in ICOPLAST, which is the International Confederation of Plastic Surgery Associations, as well as being the ASPS ambassador to Central and South America. So just as a reminder to you all, please submit your questions by posting on the stream on Facebook Live, as well as on Twitter using the hashtag PRS Grand Rounds for a live Q&A with Dr. Murphy at the end of this lecture, where he will answer as many questions as possible. Also remember, we have a free collection of articles online from Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery to accompany this presentation. These articles are available for free, anytime, all the time, at the link below. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank everybody at PRS for helping us with these initiatives, including Dr. Rorick, Aaron, Dustin, Donnell, Christina, Angela, and everyone else, for all your support and hard work in helping us with these endeavors. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to give you Dr. Robert Murphy talking on plastic surgery leadership.
Well, thanks, Shuja. And of course, it's his pleasure because I'm his program director. He had to say that. But thank you all for joining us here tonight for this third in the series of PRS rounds online. Tonight's going to be a little different topic than what you've heard before in traditional surgical topics like rhinoplasty and transgender surgery. But hopefully you'll find it interesting. Hopefully there are those of you out there in the audience who have an interest in leadership and will find this helpful. So let's get on with it. So what is leadership? Now, I was taught very young that whenever you had to use the word that you're trying to define in the definition, you were going to be in trouble. As a matter of fact, that's what we find when we go into a dictionary and look for the word leader. Typically, they use instances of leader or leadership to define what a leader is. And basically what that tells you is, we know what a leader looks like. We know who we think leaders are, but how do you really wrap your arms around it? And that's a tougher job. And if that's what you want to do, how do you emulate someone? How do you gain the skill sets and the characteristics? And hopefully after this lecture, that'll be a little more clear. So I'm going to show you two pictures right now. Picture one. Picture two. Who do you think's a leader there? What are the characteristics that differentiate these two pictures from each other? Well, they've all served in generally the same capacity in the same country in our world. The first picture, though, you see a serenity, peacefulness, a comfort in one's own skin that maybe you don't see here in the second picture. So I think it's critical at the very outset to differentiate the differences between leaders and managers. While the latter two were very competent and could be very competent managers, there's obvious issues with people's impressions of them as leaders, whereas that same concern does not exist here. So while many would say that the real skills and art of leadership have disappeared, I take a little exception to that. People aren't necessarily born with everything they need to be leaders, but with the appropriate time and investment, certainly leadership can be developed. So, what motivates someone to lead? Well, first somebody has to have a vision. Somebody has to really take on their shoulders something that they want to champion and lead forward, kind of the Don Quixote side of one's personality. So, here think of our founding fathers, John Hancock and Thomas Jefferson and Adams. Or think of someone like Steve Jobs, who redefined the computer industry. They had a vision, and they turned that vision into substance. There are those who lead who have a commitment to principle, even sometimes principle at their own peril. In this case, you can think of folks like Gandhi, Muhammad, Christ, or more recently, Martin Luther King. And then there's a part of a leader that is there because of need for personal recognition or advancement. And, there's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's not the sine qua non for why someone is pursuing a position. But there's a certain recognition that comes with someone being successful in advancing a vision or commitment that's to be applauded and not decried. So if this is what motivates someone to lead, what sort of qualities do you look in someone who you would follow as a leader? What is it that gives someone the credibility to be a leader? So if you were to boil it down into just a couple qualities, one might say that in order for you to feel comfortable recognizing someone who's leading you, you'd certainly want them to be honest. I mean, you want to have confidence in what they're saying. You want to know that you're not going to be circled around and have something sneak up on you from behind if you've committed to someone. You want that person to be forward-looking. You want them to anticipate problems. You want them to be solving in the future. You want them to be proactive and not reactive. And you want them to be inspirational. Think of George Washington. Think of Abraham Lincoln. I don't think there's many people being inspired by what's happening in the Beltway right now. Differentiating again between what makes a good leader and what maybe makes a good manager. And competency. Certainly someone can be as inspirational as the next, but if they're not the type of person who can deliver on promises, it's probably not the type of person who's going to be a leader for any amount of time. And competency and confidence, that all boils down to what makes a good leader, because it doesn't serve either the person who's trying to be a leader or those who have invested their time and goodwill in following someone if those capabilities just don't exist. So, what are some leadership characteristics? Well, leadership characteristics, these are qualities that define what you are and who you are. So, different leaders will have different characteristics and different measures and balances. But certainly integrity, for the obvious reasons. These are going to be self-explanatory as we go through them quickly. Courage, most leaders have to advance some unpopular positions during their course of leadership. Discipline, you have to have the focus to maintain your path and your course despite challenges that arise. Loyalty to your premise and to the people who follow you. Diligence, perseverance in the face of challenges. Humility, often overlooked when someone is really describing leadership. That's certainly the type of thing that doesn't necessarily come top of mind, but certainly, the type of individual who is out there self-promoting all the time is not someone who's going to engender the type of following that a good, true leader will. And all we have to do is look at our airwaves today to understand that. Optimism. Lots of challenges in leadership. I mean, most things don't come easily, so you have to have the ability to see that glass as half full in order to advance your premise forward, and also to keep that inspirational motivation for those who follow. Conviction. Unless you're really invested in what you're trying to advance, it's not going to stand the pressure test of time. And vision. The idea of knowing where you are and what your true north is as far as where you're going to be. And more now in the world today, with things moving so fast and circumstances changing so fast, you have to be able to think on your feet and innovate in real time. But to start out as a leadership, how do you begin that journey? So people, as I said, are born with a certain mix of those qualities and those personal characteristics. But there's a skill set that you have to take in order to evolve those characteristics into a leader. And the first one I'd suggest that you would need to do is you need to have great powers of observation. So in order to understand how to lead, you have to understand what it's like to sit back in the back of the room and follow and see what people need. You have to be able to observe your current state and draw from it things that need to be changed. You have to understand all facets of the problem that you're going to be dealing with. You have to then be able to formulate a plan to deal with it, socialize that plan, and finally operationalize that plan. So you don't get those insights unless you've really sat behind and listened and seen what's gone on in front of you and then developed a plan. And then leadership is evolution. So even once you've developed a plan, in business and operational talk, there's what's known as the PDSA cycle, the plan, do, study, act cycle. So this is constantly evolving your position and your need of your group that you're leading with relationship to the circumstances at any particular time. So we talked about the characteristics which define who you are, and now we're going to talk about behaviors that define what you do as a leader. You have to be decisive. The enemy of good, an enemy of great is being just needing to go to that extra mile, to know every little particular. Sometimes that traps you in your inability to be decisive and move an agenda forward. So good has to be good enough in some instances to move your agenda. As I suggested in the slide before, you have to be a good listener to understand not only what all aspects of the problem are, but also what your constituency wants and what their viewpoints are. You have to be able to keep commitments. Very importantly, you have to give recognition. And what I would suggest to folks of you who say, well, that's pretty self-evident. There's two ways of giving recognition. One is to say, my team. Very common in those leadership circles I travel in to hear someone giving credit to the group that they work with by saying my team. I would suggest that's not giving recognition to folks in the prima facie way that they deserve. It's actually recognizing folks for working with you in advancing your agenda. Whereas giving recognition, real solid recognition, is being able to point to someone else for their contributions and not necessarily have that reflect towards you, but actually is more representative of their contributions. You want to be able to understand your followers, understand the challenges that they'll face, and then you want to be able to equip that to deal with any challenges that they have, take away obstacles, remove barriers. And be consistent. You can't be giving someone a charge to commit resources, to make intros and projects, and then 48 hours after they've committed a lot of work, blood, sweat, and tears, change the path that you're going down. Good judgment, of course, fairness, absolutely, and emphasize principles, not rules. That's one thing, again, that's a differentiator, not often talked about. It's a manager who follows rules, to the point of absurdity sometimes. It's the leader who understands the principles and moves an agenda forward based on the true north direction. And ultimately, to be a good leader, you have to develop a team mentality. So as I said, recognition, team mentality, all of that boils down to the fact that, a really good leader helps to inspire, helps to create a vision, but also is one who develops the followers, gives them the opportunity to shine, and also gives them the credit that they are due. So perseverance, leadership is a commitment. Someone does not walk into a leadership position without having invested a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears, and without having championed an agenda or two that's really made a difference. Just in this slide, I always think of the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago Cubs after 100 years finally coming around and taking it all. But when we think of leaders too, George Washington often recognized as the father of our nation and a great leader during our war for independence, was actually a subpar and mediocre commander during the French and Indian War and barely escaped being killed during an assault on a fort in Ohio. What he did do, though, was he learned from that experience. He continued to develop, mature, and evolve, and learn how to be truly inspirational, so that when the troops were suffering the trials of that winter at Valley Forge, he was able to keep a Continental Army together, which ultimately prevailed and led to this nation that began down the road a little bit in Philadelphia. And part of what Washington did is he gave those underclothed, underarmed, undertrained mercenaries and farmers an ability to believe in a vision and an ability to hope for better days. And that's not a quality that we can underestimate. So that said, if that sets the table then for what is a good leader and how one can evolve, let's talk about the forks in the road that you can take in our specialty. So the first differentiator and the first fork is if someone is interested in some sort of leadership, there's what I call extramural and intramural leadership. Extramural leadership is that type of leadership that we can provide in our community, our church groups, our PTAs, our Board of Educations, and the like. Because we as professionals, we as plastic surgeons are viewed by our peers in our community as being folks of reasonably good intelligence and insight. And so there's certainly roles that we can serve near home that are outside of medicine that are very valuable and make a big contribution to our community, so should not be overlooked. But the intramural leadership capabilities that we have within medicine are broad enough and have forks in their own roads. So let's talk about those for a little bit. So I tend to break down the intramural medical leadership into three different blocks. The technical block, which is based upon the skills and core training that we receive during our residencies to the point that we receive our boards. We're competent plastic surgeons. We have good technical ability. We have research capabilities. And then we go on to develop these to a level of certain expertise from which others can benefit. There's the societal leadership positions, which are based upon our ability to professionally network. So whether they're regional societies, whether national societies or specialty societies, that's one path we can also take. And then there are institutional positions that we can fill. Again, as plastic surgeons, we are creative thinkers. We're often looked at to solve other people's problems, and we can use these to our advantage. So in the technical sphere, we have the practice and procedural realms. And for that, I mean the skill sets that we have in being able to interact with nurses, healthcare professionals, perform the type of surgery that we do with a level of expertise and aplomb that is unparalleled. And from that, someone can develop a reputation and be a leader in rhinoplasty, as our friend Dr. Rorich, or in transgender surgery, as you heard last week, or the very capable and forward-thinking colleagues that we have performing groundbreaking research in stem cell therapy, like Peter Rubin in Pittsburgh, or nanotechnology like Paul Soderna out at Michigan, and many, many others who make significant contributions to our profession. And I'm very proud to recount knowing the late Dr. Joseph Murray, who, as many of you recognize, received a Nobel Prize for kidney transplant, but was a plastic surgeon. So if we're looking at our ability to lead in these two areas, we look at developing our technical competencies. And with this, we also probably have to look at developing a writing competency going forward so that we can get our research and our practices out there for our peers to evaluate and adopt. And for that purpose, PRS, for example, has various symposiums on the like about how to get articles written and papers published. Within the societal, I bifurcate this into the general medical community with your county medical societies, state medical societies, AMA, versus specialty societies, which would be plastic surgery societies, both regionally and on the state level. Specialty plastic surgery societies like the Hand Society, the Microsurgery Society, the Aesthetic Society, ASPS as our national society, or even the American College of Surgeons. For this, there's certain competencies, again, you have to develop, but there's certain benefits by becoming involved in these things as they give you an ability to connect and to network and develop your own personal and professional career as you are also developing your leadership competencies and growing in the societies. And again, this is a slide we went with a little earlier because I'm going to tell you what it was that began me on this path. Certainly there are surgeons out there who are much more skilled than I, but what I did carry was a little bit of that New York chip on my shoulder, so that when I was a two year out of training attending, and there was a malpractice crisis in Pennsylvania, and one of my neurosurgical colleagues asked to meet with a state representative about a vote that was going to occur, and this line appeared in the paper the next day. Got my Irish up, and I decided that people, to be able to say that about physicians, as sincere as we were about providing quality care to our patients and the challenge that we face, and have someone who clearly misunderstood our ability to impact the lives of the people for which we care and demonize us, was something that I found completely unacceptable. So with that, became involved in local and statewide societies for advocacy that ultimately went on to help lead to the defeat of this good Senator Affleback in a rather dramatic fashion going forward. So with that, I received a good sense of purpose that I could make a difference, and decided to dedicate part of my leadership life along these lines. Like my guru, having grown up in the Bronx, Yogi Berra says, but oftentimes leadership is not once and done. We as doctors face constant challenges, whether it's a senator like Affleback challenging us for what we do, whether it's tort reform, cosmetic taxes, reporting requirements by governmental agencies, or scope of practice issues out there. We're constantly challenged, and there's need for volunteerism to help us advance our society, and with that comes certain leadership opportunities. A little less usual are institutional leadership pathways, medical staff committees, excellent opportunities for young plastic surgeons to get involved in their own institutions by being committee chairs, members, and then ultimately chairs, which actually helps shape the culture of your local institution. Also provides you with networking and referral patterns. So often overlooked, but a very important way that we can become leaders. The traditional division chief and department chair, and the new and evolving field of leadership in which I've been heavily involved is that there's ever larger group of surgeons and plastic surgeons in particular who are becoming chief officers of one type of either large practice groups, institutions, or networks. So recently in our journal, there was a talk about trends in leadership in plastic surgery. This addressed what it took to be a program director and what the characteristics were. And what we see a lot of younger, well-trained people stepping into program directorships earlier than what had been the norm in perhaps my day. So that the trend in program directorships is for younger folks in the 40 to 50 year of age adopting a program directorship, but more in particular, people who are fellowship trained, not just the general plastic surgeon, but someone who brings a special expertise into the division of the department. So there goes that technical leadership ability with your leadership in your institution, being able to be springboarded from your abilities and your visibility. A nice article by Scott Levin and Charles Verheiden about what it takes to be a chair or a chief in an institution, basically citing all those characteristics and all those behavior patterns that we talked about, while also giving an insight about what skill sets need to be adopted and evolved. And while it may be that still this type of leadership is based on a core competency within the field of plastic surgery, once you start to interact at an institutional level in leadership in chief and chair positions, probably going to be in your best interest to start thinking in terms of additional training, additional exposure to courses such as in management or business. Happily, there are several ways to obtain these, either online or in weekend courses through various business schools. So this has become a recognized need in the academic community and a definite advantage for those seeking leadership if they can avail themselves of these courses, not so much to become experts in subject matter, but so that you understand thought processes and understand the vocabulary of someone perhaps in finance talking about a project you want to undertake. And then administrative in the chief medical officer role, the chief executive officer role, or in my case, the chief integration officer role. There are an evolving recognition of a cadre of physicians who are becoming involved in this. The New England Journal recently recognizing the need for more and more folks with advanced degrees, either masters in medical management, masters of public health, masters of science, or masters of business administration, if one aspires to a chief level position. And just as an example of this, never in my greatest deviation of thought pattern had I ever thought that at this point in my career I'd be talking about the business of integrating health systems with insurance companies in order to provide care to folks that we need to treat in our community, like who are taking their benefits from the exchange or Medicare and Medicaid. But it's been, for me personally, a very interesting and always evolving journey. So there's been lots of forks out there. Hopefully in the time allotted, I've given you a sense of what it is to be a leader, the type of characteristics and skill sets you need to develop into a leader, the different forks and paths you can take to be a leader. And hopefully from this, you would understand that basically leadership is built on teamwork. Those who have vision and can build the best teams often win. But ultimately, leadership is serving the people that you do lead. And with that, I will thank you all and turn the podium back to Dr. Shafkat.
All right, we're just going to do a quick little in-between here. Just thank you very much, Dr. Murphy, for that great lecture. Just from having known him for the last 6 years and seeing him interact around our hospital as well as at the meetings, this is basically how he is every day. And this is applicable across all fields, whether you're in business, whether you're in other medical specialties. I think this was a great lecture. And something a little bit different. So one thing I did want to mention is, on behalf of Dr. Rorick, my co-ambassadors, and I are happy to announce, again, on behalf of Dr. Rorick and the PRS, that at Plastic Surgery, the meeting in Orlando, we will be hosting a PRS Grand Rounds Live. more details to come. But just so you know, registration is open for PSTM 17. So you can go to plasticsurgeryinthemeeting.com and register for that. So just wanted to give that quick shout out there. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Murphy, and we'll go to the text line for questions.
Thanks, Yuja. So happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
All right, so the first question is from Dr. Rorik himself. He says, how do you lead people with diverse backgrounds and opinions to a unified goal?
Not fair, Rod, for jumping in like that. But no, I mean, basically it goes to the purple slide, where first, great leaders are folks that appreciate the diversities that are there in a group, as there will be in any group, but then looks for the common threads, because whether it's in an area of employment, they're there for a certain purpose. If they're with a company, whether it's residents who need a certain addition to their training program, if you listen hard enough, you're always going to be able to identify a commonality of concern, or a commonality of purpose, or a commonality of need. You just have to, the sensitivity is to train your ear to listen in a culturally appropriate or diversity accepting way. So different people can express themselves quite differently, as me being a good Bronx kid might have a certain enthusiasm for expressing a point of view, where someone from the South may be a little more demure in their opinions. Ultimately, it's listening hard, valuing everybody to the same degree, and then being able to put it together for defining a common purpose that you can build a vision around.
All right, next question is from Chad Purnell. He asks, any recommendations on how to deal with poor performers under your leadership?
So ultimately, if you're going to be productive and have good outcomes, you can't avoid dealing with that. So first, you have to understand the structure of the community that you're leading. So, is it an employment relationship with a hierarchical reporting structure? Is it a volunteer or not type of group? So there's different mechanisms that are built out in that. But the common thread in this, I think, would be that you are always respectful of the person that you have to interact with, and have to understand the venue that you want to interact with. So you never address poor performance in a way that calls someone out in the public eye. If there's a need to go into it, you actually, in business, we ask what's called the 5 whys. So if there's something that's a questionable performance area, you would ask why and try to understand more. And then ultimately, by the time, if you don't get it after 3 or 4 whys, it's probably a poorly designed project. And then you would go offline and discuss off the side. But a good leader actually has to be able to deal with accountability. Someone who can't do that probably is not going to get very far, but has to deal with poor performers in a respectful way when you're in a group, and then if there's any need to get down and dirty, to do that privately.
Okay, from Akash Chandawarkar, how do you effectively lead across disciplines and build credibility in areas you may not be the knowledge expert in?
Great question. So there are two approaches to that, Akash. One is one of the first slides where we talked about credibility. There are characteristics that you have to bring to the table, where people have to recognize that you have some degree of integrity, some degree of competency in some field. The reason, as much as people in my institution try to make me the businessman full time, is because as a reconstructive surgeon, I take care of all their problems and I get down and dirty with the best of them. So there's a credibility that I've developed there. So you always want to be recognized for a competency or credibility in your own field of expertise. To a degree, and then what you need to do is evolve, like we talked about. Develop the understanding, evolve so that you understand the language of the people in the other groups. Evolve so that you listen to the point where you can understand their problems. And then again, plastic surgeons are great thinkers. So once you can listen, once you can evolve the language, once you can gain the insights. You offer suggestions as part of a discussion, and suggest answers. Never allow an opportunity to be the leader in advancing suggestions out there and asking people to come along. It's engaging folks and dragging them to your point of view by having a sound foundation is the way that you go across disciplines.
Okay, from PRS Global Open, they ask, despite the learning, education, and training in leadership that's possible, do you believe there are born leaders?
I do believe that there are people who are born with some degrees of a level of all those characteristics, but during the development they have to evolve different levels of those characteristics. I don't know that it's actually makes a difference whether you're born or not, because even if you're born a leader, there are competencies you have to continually evolve in order to be an effective leader. So yes, I would say that some people maybe are born with certain skill sets, or maybe a little more intelligence, maybe a little more hand-eye coordination, maybe a little bit more this or that, but their parents or whatever social impact they have during the developmental stage would make them more decisive, or make them honest or not, or give them a level of integrity or not. But then too, once they've gained a certain position, it's always evolving. It's always keeping your skill set sharp, continually evaluating the circumstances around you and your position, and always making sure that your vision to the true north is appropriate going forward. So it's kind of, yes, to a degree, but ultimately your constant evolution is what makes a good leader.
Okay, from R.S. Salibian, what tips do you have for residents to balance societal leadership with demands of technical leadership during training?
R.S., good question. So the first thing I would say is that first, foremost, and forever, you are blessed to have come to that point in life where you are a plastic surgeon in training, which is a position to which the better part of the world would aspire. So it's your duty to yourself and your profession to gain those technical and intellectual competencies during your training. You'll never be able to get those years back, and those are without question the foundation for your ability to be technically competent, to be able to give good care to and safe care to your patients, and that's the foundation for your reputation to then go into committees and go into societal leadership positions, because without that you don't have any credibility. So I would say first and foremost, make sure you develop those educational criteria, and then as those criteria develop, if you feel drawn more to the fact that, well, geez, I really love microsurgery and I think I'm really good at, and I'm thinking of this way of changing that or this type of research, then you go down the technical path. If you see your society being challenged by Senator Affleback, then you go down an advocacy channel. So you can evolve your interests in different committees or societies, but without having a technical and an educational and an intellectual foundation that you developed during your residency, you won't go very far.
Okay, from Raj Martinez, can you give us a sense of what committees are available for residents to join within ASPS, and what should resident goals be on these committees? Excellent.
So the way I look at that is ASPS, during the last several years, there's been a real commitment to leadership, but also to valuing our members at all levels. So most of our committees now have a resident leader attached to our committees. In fact, there's also a resident representative to our board of directors. So our society is trying to engage residents and young surgeons at a very early age. So if you have a particular interest in quality, if you have an interest in legislative affairs, if you have an interest in any particular area, most of the committees that are chartered by ASPS do request resident representation, and ultimately someone being voted to the board. As you transition from residency to a young, out-of-training plastic surgeon, ASPS has the Young Plastic Surgeons Committee, which is a tremendous way to meet your peers, particularly those who probably are going to be involved in committee work and leadership at some point during their years in practice. And that's been a committee that's had tremendous success. Dr. Rorick, myself, many other ASPS presidents all began and received our foundations in understanding organizations and understanding how to interact with people, either in the specialty or across specialties, and ultimately provided us with training and exposure to other avenues of learning, which led to our ability to lead the largest plastic surgery society in the world.
Okay, from Francesco Egro, he asked, could you please give more details about any of the leadership courses or other courses you recommend taking?
Francisco, that depends. Again, I kind of try to break it down a little bit into which fork in the road you were going for. So that in general societal leadership, for example, ASPS has Pathways to Leadership, which puts you through exercises in team building, helps you gain insight into the type of leader you would be, what your strong points, what your weak points are. So there's some of those type of foundational understanding yourself and basic skill things that are there. ASPS, as I say, offers one. As you get up into either higher levels of committee work or in your institution, should you be looking towards chief or chair positions, then you're probably going to need maybe a little higher skill set in understanding management or business or the like. And you often can find that type of course in two places I would recommend. One is the American Association of Physician Leaders, AAPL, which grants what's called a CPE, a Certified Physician Executive degree. It's not a degree, but certification, which I hold. And from that, you can gain, you can do online courses in finance. You can do online courses on conflict management, how to deal with the poor performer, as we talked about before. You can do courses like that online, which are cheap. You can attend their meetings for on-face type of understanding. Or you can go to, if you want something a little more concentrated, you can go to business schools, which tends to be a little more expensive. But various business schools like University of Michigan, Darden, Duke, I believe, and a few others around the country actually have weekend courses where you would go for 4 weekends or 6 weekends, depending what it is, for a day or two, and you would take courses in finance or business and marketing. And it doesn't get you a degree, but it gives you a basic ability to understand folks around you who might be dealing with that. And then ultimately, should you want to get into the very highest levels of management, particularly on the institutional side, there are the master's levels degrees. One you can get again through the American Association of Physician Leaders, which is called an MMM, a Master's in Medical Management. The traditional MBA, MPH, or Masters of Science. So various levels, and by all means, if at some point you have an interest, I'm happy to help guide you along those lines if you would find that more helpful.
All right, so just a couple more. I actually think this is a great question. So from Chad Tevin, he says, thank you for a great talk. Historically, IQ has been considered integral for leadership. More recently, Harvard Business Review and others talk about the importance of EQ, being emotional intelligence. What are your thoughts as this pertains to plastic surgery?
Well, I'm the case in point why it is an IQ. I actually, if you look at Harvard Business School philosophy in the 1980s, 90s to the year about 2000, IQ was considered the most important because of the style of management which was rampant in the U.S. at those days, which was C-suite driven. As American industry collapsed to a degree, there was a transition to quality management, such as Toyota Lean and the like, which emphasized the fact that leaders should respect the workers at the front line and understand their opinions and listen to them for solutions. And with that came the concept of moving from IQ to EI, emotional intelligence, as you said. I happen to think that, my own personal prejudice is that you can have the brightest person on the face of the earth. There's no doubt in my mind that that there are some very smart people out there that are in the position of leadership who fail miserably because they cannot be forward visioning enough to lead a group of people. They can try to advance a personal agenda, but not lead a group of people because they haven't listened. They're not sensitive to diversity. They're not sensitive to the needs of the community. So I'm very much having trained and received my non-medical degrees and training during that era of Harvard Business move to EI. I'm very much a believer, as you probably got from this talk, since I spent so much time on characteristics and qualities and behaviors, the fact that we in plastic surgery, we have the IQ. That's kind of a given. That's the sine qua non for being in the specialty that we are, because if you didn't have that, you wouldn't have gotten to where we are. So accepting that as foundational, I think that the real good leaders like Dr. Rorik out there, and many of those folks under whom you train, the real good leaders are those that do have high emotional intelligence coefficients, and that's the type of thing that you can learn in a different type of leadership management training program like the AAPS has with Pathways to Leadership, where there's a lot of self-surveying and gives you some resources to realize your strengths, but also the weaknesses which will require development for you to achieve the highest stature of leadership, what they call in Good to Great the level 5 leader. And I think all of us being highly competitive achievers, if we go into leadership, we all aspire to be level 5s.
Okay, 2 more questions. From Chris Gold, if someone wants to move into an institutional leadership role, do you see an MBA as a requisite to get the role, or better pursue it once in the role and a way to hone skills?
That depends on what you're looking for. I also don't believe that the MBA is kind of the gold standard for moving into leadership at an institutional level. It depends what you're shooting for. When I was moving down this way, my CEO, who was a Yale undergrad, Harvard Medical School, Wharton Business School, University of Chicago dean, was my first CEO when I started in leadership. He said, if you're going to run like a physician, a multi-specialty group, an MBA might be a good idea. If you are going to be involved in other aspects of medical leadership, and you're high enough, you'll have the MBAs working for you. So it depends exactly what your interest is and what you like. So if you're going to be in some capacity where you're really diving deep into the finances, MBA, very good. But so we have in our evolving world today in institutional leadership, we have quality is a buzzword that comes to us from any supervising organization. So we have a chief quality officer who just got a degree in medical quality management at Northwestern University. I'm an integration officer, which basically is someone who takes the multiple hospitals that we have, the multiple medical staffs that we have, the multiple insurance plans that we have, puts it in a blender and tries to make some sense of it. And for that, I got a master's in health evaluation. So there's different methods to madness. So if you have not defined where you want to be, it might be good to get into chair roles in your institution, feel where you want to be. In general, an MBA doesn't hurt, but if you want to do a CMO as opposed to a CEO, or if you want to be chief transformational officer or chief integration officer. These are evolving titles due to the change in healthcare delivery that we have now. Then you might be better served with Masters of Science and Masters of Medical Management, something along those lines. So 2 courses to go. MBA certainly is a great degree to have, but with the evolving nature of how we're providing healthcare in institutions and the specific skill sets that you need within them, other master programs are perhaps more valuable.
Okay, and the last question we'll do tonight from Raja Mohan. For someone wanting to be a leader, I believe a challenging task is figuring out how to navigate relationships with people from different levels, i.e. chairmen, peers, juniors. How do you suggest leaders handle relationships with different types of people?
It all boils down to respect. And so the downfall of traditional corporate management style, when you look at the evolution of a Bethlehem Steel or some of these others that are taught in business school, was the IQ over the EI and the general lack of respect for contributions of folks below you in hierarchy. So whether you are dealing with a superior, obviously it makes sense to be respectful. But also when you're dealing with folks who are maybe underneath you in a hierarchy, absolute respect is important. Because the ones underneath you at that point are the people who are going to have your back when you're, or not, when you're trying to lead a project. The ones over you will understand if you are respectful. They're also smart enough to understand whether you're being a little two-faced about it. So respect for the people that you're dealing with, respect for their contributions, listening, developing consensus, and as I say, leading projects and giving people credit where credit's due, even if you have to take a little bit of a step back, because you respect their contributions. I think that builds a lot of teamwork. It builds a lot of respect for you and your position as an evolving leader, and will build a tremendous sense of loyalty for those who have worked with you to help advance your own agendas going forward. So it all boils down to being the type of person that your parents raised you to be, and respecting everybody you come in contact with.
Okay. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. I just want to say thank you very much, Dr. Murphy, for joining us today, spending time. It's 10 o'clock over here near Philadelphia. Thank you all for joining us. Like Dr. Rorick commented, one thing you should mention and that you do so well is lead by example, and that is so key to be a true selfless leader. So thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care and have a good night.